Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty special today.
Yeah, we've got Tony Fadell's build, the guy behind, well, the iPod.
And the Nest thermostat. I mean, talk about a design legend.
It's not just a typical business book, though. It's like more personal.
Yeah, almost like a mentor, just chatting with you, giving you advice.
Exactly. It's packed with stories,
Yeah.
lessons, things he wishes he'd known earlier.
So we're going to dig into all that, see what we can all take away from Fadell's journey.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Fadell kicks things off by taking us way back
Back to the early 90s.
to this company, General Magic. They were basically trying to make, well, a smartphone.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Touch screens, messaging, even apps, like way ahead of their time.
Crazy to think about.
But here's the thing.
They failed.
Yeah, General Magic ultimately failed, and Fadell, he doesn't shy away from that at all.
He really embraces it, doesn't he?
He actually says, watching your dreams go up in flames, that's part of the process, especially early on.
So for you as a listener, what's that like to hear? Is it comforting? A little scary, maybe?
It's definitely a different way of looking at things, right?
Yeah.
We're usually taught to avoid failure at all costs.
Totally.
But Fadell's saying, hey, it happens, it's gonna happen, it's a chance to learn and grow from it.
So it's more about how you react to it.
Exactly. He even went on to lead these pocket PC projects at Philips, the Velo and Nino.
I remember those. They got amazing reviews.
Critically acclaimed, but commercially, they didn't quite hit the mark.
So even with a great product, success isn't guaranteed. Makes you think, what separates those who bounce back from the ones who don't?
That's the big question. And I think Fadell would say a lot of it is mindset.
Mindset.
He talks about finding opportunities where you can have real impact, not just chasing titles or big paychecks.
So it's not about the money.
He actually specifically mentions smaller companies,
Yeah.
like 30 to 100 people.
Yeah.
Says that's ideal for learning and growing, especially early in your career.
Okay, so not the huge corporations then.
He says those can be good for stability, a steady paycheck, but maybe not so much impact early on.
Makes sense.
And then there's this other piece of advice he gives. Look up and around.
I love that one. It's so simple, but so powerful.
Right. Don't get stuck in your own little world. See the bigger picture of what's going on.
So what does that mean for our listeners? Looking up and around.
Be curious. Talk to people in different departments. Get a feel for how everything works together,
So don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you think they're dumb.
Exactly. Think like a manager, even if you're not one yet.
Now, let's talk leadership. Fadell gets super honest about his own struggles with micromanagement.
I know. As a young CTO, he even went to therapy to help him deal with it.
That's really refreshing to hear, right? He's not afraid to admit he's not perfect.
It's a good reminder that becoming a leader, it's not always easy.
You need different skills,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes you need help to develop those.
Absolutely.
So what does Fadell say about actually being a good manager? Well, first off, you don't have to be one.
Right. Some people are amazing individual contributors, and that's totally okay.
But if you do go the management route, there are a few things to keep in mind.
Like letting go of those individual tasks. It's tough, but you got to do it.
And supporting your team's growth, even if they end up surpassing you.
He really emphasizes that your job is to help your team shine.
I love that.
And being honest, Creating a culture where feedback's welcomed. And it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
He even compares managing to, like, parenting.
Nurturing your team, helping them reach their full potential.
Okay, switching gears a bit, Fadell talks about decision-making, and it's something a lot of people struggle with.
He makes this distinction between data-driven decisions, which are obviously super important,
Right.
and opinion-driven decisions, where you have to trust your gut.
And he learned that the hard way at Philips.
Yeah.
Too much data analysis, too many consultants, and it led to, well, paralysis.
Yeah, they were so busy crunching numbers, they missed opportunities. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, totally. So how do you know when to trust your gut?
Fadell has this strategy he outlines for opinion-driven decisions. Be clear about why you don't have enough data.
Okay, so be transparent.
Present a strong argument based on your experience, what you know about customers,
And be upfront about the risks.
but also highlight the potential rewards. And the crazy thing is, this approach worked even with Steve Jobs, convinced him to go with the iPod, even without tons of market research.
Wow, that's impressive. Speaking of Steve Jobs, Fadell has this hilarious section about different types of difficult people you'll encounter in your career.
Oh yeah, his asshole taxonomy.
He calls one the political asshole, all about taking credit, avoiding risk, undermining colleagues.
He even tells the story about one guy who said to him, There are two swinging dicks in this room, and mine is the biggest. Can you believe that?
Oh my.
But it's not just about the laughs. Fadell gives real advice on how to deal with these types.
So what do you do?
Direct confrontation, he says, rarely works.
So what does work?
Documentation. Build your case. Keep records of what's happening.
Okay, smart.
And sometimes, honestly, you just gotta ignore them. Or work around them.
What about if it's really bad?
He says, sometimes the best thing is just walk away. You don't have to put up with toxic behavior.
All right, so we've covered a lot already. From embracing failure to seeking impact, understanding the bigger picture, and even dealing with those difficult personalities.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. What are some key things that stand out for you?
For me, it's about mindset.
Yeah.
Being proactive. Don't wait for things to happen. Make them happen.
Absolutely.
Be curious. Ask those questions. Build relationships. And don't be afraid to trust your gut, even when you don't have all the data in the world.
Fadell makes it clear success isn't a straight line. It's messy. It's got ups and downs. You're going to hit roadblocks.
But you learn from all of it. And keep moving forward.
Exactly. So we've talked about Fadell's journey, his own experiences, his mindset. But what about the nuts and bolts of building a company, a successful team? He gets into all that in Build, and there's some really insightful stuff.
It's amazing how he connects everything, from General Magic to Philips, Apple, Nest. You get this whole picture of what works, what doesn't. And one thing that really struck me was how much emphasis he puts on the right people.
Finding the right team.
A near-perfect team, he calls it. Smart people, passionate, but also they have to complement each other.
Not just individual brilliance, but how they fit together.
Yeah, like pieces of a puzzle. And as the team grows, he talks about bringing in fresh perspectives, new grads, interns, letting them learn from the veterans. He calls these top performers, the exceptional ones, seed crystals.
Seed crystals.
They attract other talented people. It's like this ripple effect of excellence.
Interesting. Now, when it comes to actually hiring those people, Fadell's got a pretty intense process.
Oh yeah, it's not just glancing at resumes and doing a quick interview.
So what does he do?
At Nest, they use this system called 3 Crowns. The hiring manager plus managers of whoever this person's going to work with internally, they all give feedback.
So it's a more holistic view of whether this person's a good fit. Not just for the role, but for the whole company culture. What do you think? Could our listeners try something like that?
It's worth considering, for sure. Makes you wonder how many amazing people slip through the cracks with the traditional hiring methods.
And it's not just about hiring, it's managing performance, too. Fadell has this pretty strong opinion about firing.
That no one should be surprised if they get fired.
Yeah, like it shouldn't come out of nowhere.
He's all about transparency. Regular check-ins, honest feedback, that should be the norm. And he even says sometimes getting fired, it can be a good thing.
Seriously.
A chance to grow, to find a better fit somewhere else.
Like closing one door to open another?
Exactly.
Fadell also gets real about the challenges of company growth. He talks about these break points that happen as teams get bigger.
It's like growing pains. You hit these points where you got to adjust how you manage, how you communicate.
He breaks it down from like 15 people to 50, 150, 400.
And he says you have to be proactive about it, change the structure, the communication, even how you do meetings. Those can get out of control fast. I'm sure our listeners know what that's like.
Oh, definitely. So it's not just about scaling up, it's about evolving.
Exactly.
One interesting thing he mentions is the need for a dedicated HR function.
Once you get past like 60 or 80 employees.
Why that number?
Because now you're not just dealing with individuals, it's families too. Their needs impact the business. Has that been your experience?
Definitely. It's a good reminder to think about the human side of things.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Design is obviously huge for Fadell. It comes up again and again in Build.
He's passionate about it. And he says design thinking should be everywhere.
Not just how the product looks.
The whole experience. Customer support, internal processes.
Make it seamless, make it delightful.
Exactly. It goes back to his time at Apple, learning from Steve Jobs. Sweating the small stuff.
Oh, I remember that story about the iPods needing to be fully charged out of the box.
Even though it slowed down the production line, Jobs insisted on it.
Classic Jobs.
Yeah.
But it shows how much thought goes into every detail, the entire customer journey.
And that journey, a big part of that is marketing. Telling the story, connecting with customers on an emotional level.
So how do you do that?
Fadell talks about prototyping the packaging for the Nest thermostat, like way before the product was even done.
The packaging.
It forced them to really refine their message.
Interesting. So the physical limitations of the box actually help them.
Yeah. Constraints can spark creativity.
I like that.
He also talks about consistency in your messaging, that rhythm of 2 to 4 big announcements a year, not too much, not too little. Find that sweet spot, that heartbeat.
Now let's talk about product management. Fadell says it's a role that a lot of people misunderstand.
It's not just project management or marketing. It's more than that.
So what is it?
He compares it to being a music producer, making sure all the instruments are in tune, playing together. The product manager understands the technology, the marketing, sales, customer support.
They're the glue that holds it all together.
They're storytellers, visionaries. They articulate the why behind the product.
Sounds like a tough job.
It is, which is why great product managers are so valuable.
Yeah.
And so hard to find.
Okay, now Fadell gets into sales. And he actually challenges that whole commission-based culture.
He says it can create a divide between the company and the salespeople.
So what does he suggest instead?
A relationship-based culture. Everyone's aligned on the mission, focused on building long-term connections with customers.
Happy customers, happier culture, more successful business. Do you think that resonates with our listeners?
I hope so. It makes a lot of sense.
Finally, let's talk about the legal team, often seen as the no people, right?
Risk-averse, the gatekeepers.
But Fadell says the best lawyers, they get it. They understand the business side, too.
They're problem solvers, not just rule enforcers.
He talks about his lawyer from the iPod days, Chip Lutton.
Who later joined them at Nest. A trusted advisor, a moral compass. He helped them navigate all the legal complexities.
He even tells this story about Chip helping them get around the labeling requirements for the Nest Cam.
It was marketed as a baby monitor, and there were all these regulations.
And Chip found a way to make it work.
It's a great example of how legal can be a partner in innovation, not an obstacle. So we've covered a lot here. Building teams, navigating growth, the roles of design, marketing, product management, sales, even legal. Fadell really gives you a complete view of what it takes to build a successful company.
All right, so we talked about building teams, products, but what about actually being the CEO? Fadell gets really personal about that in Build. Doesn't hold back on the challenges, the pressures.
Nope, not at all. He straight up says there's nothing quite like being the CEO. He should know, right? Not just with Nest, but his earlier startup, Fuse Systems. And it's true, the buck stops with you. Everything you do, your priorities, sets the tone for the whole company.
He talks about leading by example, like going above and beyond to show how much you care about quality. He even shares this story about reviewing customer support articles at Nest, like personally going through them.
It's that attention to detail, right? It's not micromanaging, it's caring. He says, you have to give a shit. And I think that really sums it up. It's gotta matter to you.
And pushing boundaries, right? Pushing yourself, your team, like to the point of almost breaking.
He compares it to stretching a rubber band. You want to see how far it can go, but not actually snap it.
Finding that balance between pushing and pulling back. What do you think? Have you ever been in that situation as a listener, where you're pushing for results, but gotta avoid burning out?
All the time. It's tough.
Fadell also warns about this thing he calls the not invented here syndrome.
Oh yeah, where leaders reject good ideas just because they came from outside the company.
Like that we've always done it this way mentality. Kills innovation.
He uses the example of Steve Jobs not really engaging with Andy Rubin, the guy behind Android. Fadell says that might have actually shaped the whole mobile industry, that missed opportunity.
Makes you think. So stay humble, be open to ideas wherever they come from. Now, Fadell also gives us a peek behind the curtain of board meetings.
The dynamics, how they're different for private versus public companies. Private company boards, he says, are more informal, more about mentorship.
Okay.
Public company boards, there's more scrutiny, more focus on the numbers.
Makes sense.
But in both cases, he says it's crucial to have a functional board. Experienced people who can give good advice, even challenge the CEO when needed. What about you? Any experience with boards? What's worked well, what hasn't?
That's a great question for our listeners to think about.
Yeah.
Because, having the right people on your board, that can make all the difference.
Fadell's experience with Google acquiring Nest, that gives some real insight into how messy mergers and acquisitions can be.
Yeah, he doesn't sugarcoat it.
He talks about aligning goals, making sure the cultures fit, thinking about the impact on employees.
He even compares it to dating and marriage.
That honeymoon phase ends, and then the real work, begins.
You got to be compatible for the long haul.
Do your due diligence, but even then, you never really know how it's going to turn out.
And he warns against relying too much on bankers. They might have their own agenda.
Right. It comes back to trusting your gut,
Yeah.
weighing the risks and rewards.
Okay, Fadell wraps up Build with a powerful message about company culture.
He's a big believer in a mission-driven culture, everyone united by a shared purpose, striving for excellence.
And he's not a fan of going overboard with perks.
He says it can create this sense of entitlement, distract from what really matters.
He even talks about pushing back against that at Google. You know, all those famous perks they have. He wanted a more balanced approach, something that was good for employees, but also fiscally responsible.
It's about staying grounded. What are we really here to do? What are our values?
And then there's his final message, the one that really sticks with you. It's the relationships that endure.
He looks back on all the friendships he's made, from General Magic to Nest. Products come and go, companies change. But those connections, those are what matter.
That's a beautiful way to end the book. It's not just about building things, it's about the people.
That's what makes Fadell's story so powerful. It's not just a business book, it's about life. The lessons we learn, the impact we make, the people who are part of the journey.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Build, we want to leave you with a question. What will you build? What legacy will you leave behind?
Go check out Tony Fadell's book, Explore His Insights. It's full of wisdom, inspiration for anyone who wants to make a difference.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing.
And keep building.